Something is happening in the Middle East right now that no Pentagon press conference will explain to you fully. And if you are sitting in America wondering why your tax dollars keep vanishing into wars that never seem to end cleanly, you need to hear this. Because a $500 million American defense system just got wiped off the map. The US Navy evacuated its own base, drone bases across the region are gone or compromised, and a country under maximum military pressure from the most powerful military on earth is still shooting back. This is the story of how Iran, facing the full combined air power of the United States and Israel in a war called Operation Epic Fury, struck back with such precision and strategic intelligence that it didn't just fight. It exposed the entire architecture of American military dominance in the Middle East as something far more fragile than the defense contractors, the generals, and the think tanks in Washington have ever been willing to admit. And this is not commentary. This is what the satellite images show. This is what the Pentagon itself quietly confirmed. And this is what the numbers, when you run them honestly, reveal about the shifting balance of power on this planet right now. On February 28, 2026, President Donald Trump, traveling on Air Force One to Corpus Christi, Texas, gave the order to proceed with Operation Epic Fury. U.S. missiles, drones, and Israeli fighter jets began striking Iran the next day, targeting air defenses and missile launchers in what the Israeli Air Force called the largest combat sortie in its history. Some 200 fighter jets striking 500 military targets in western and central Iran. Washington called it overwhelming force. The White House said Iran's ballistic missile capacity was functionally destroyed. Trump announced to the world that America had achieved complete and total aerial dominance over Iran. Now let's talk about what Iran did in response, because that part of the story is where the real education begins. Within the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury, Iranian retaliation focused not on overwhelming American interceptors with brute force, but on the sensor networks and early warning nodes that enable Washington's layered missile defense architecture to function at all. Iran went after the eyes, not the fists, the eyes. And that distinction tells you everything about how a nation with a fraction of the military budget of the United States can still manage to humiliate the most expensive defense apparatus in human history. Satellite imagery taken on March 2, 2026 showed debris surrounding a blackened THAAD radar at the Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, over 500 miles from Iran. The radar system in question is the AN/TPY-2 transportable radar manufactured by Raytheon, and according to the 2025 Missile Defense Agency budget, it costs just shy of $500 million. The image shows a pair of 13-foot craters in the sand near the radar, split across 5 40-foot trailers, all of which appeared destroyed or seriously damaged. Think about that geography for a moment. 500 miles from Iran, in Jordan, a country that is not even a party to this war. And Iran reached out and touched that $500 million radar with enough precision that satellite cameras captured the craters alongside the wreckage. This was not luck. This was not a spray and pray response. This was doctrine. The AN/TPY-2 radar is widely regarded as the eyes of the THAAD interceptor system, performing the crucial tasks of long-range missile detection, trajectory tracking, warhead discrimination, and fire control cueing for interceptors operating in the upper atmosphere. Within the emerging strategic narrative of the conflict, the destruction of the radar illustrates a shift toward precision counter-sensor warfare, Tehran prioritizing blinding surveillance and tracking systems rather than merely overwhelming interceptors through missile saturation. Now, here is where the story gets truly deep and truly uncomfortable for anyone who has been told that American military supremacy is simply a law of nature. Iran struck at a minimum of 11 U.S. military facilities across the Middle East since February 28th. The facilities hit included Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest U.S. base in the entire Middle East, Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama, Bahrain. Read those names slowly. Every single one of them represents decades of American diplomatic effort, billions in construction costs, treaty relationships built across generations. And Iran hit all of them. Not perfectly, not devastatingly in every case, but enough. After Iranian drones damaged U.S. Navy facilities in Manama, Bahrain, U.S. Navy Central Command told all service members and contractors who live and work in and around the base that the area is no longer safe and they would receive money to stay in a hotel elsewhere. The closure came after Iranian drones hit the base and multiple high-rise residential buildings in Bahrain, with the email sent to personnel titled "Evacuation of Jufair," the neighborhood in southern Manama home to naval support activity Bahrain, the U.S. Navy evacuating from its own base because of Iranian drones. The Fifth Fleet, America's forward naval presence in the entire Gulf region, the instrument of American power projection from the Strait of Hormuz to the Red Sea, had to tell its sailors to go find a hotel. If you are an American watching this and wondering what it means the geography of American power is not as fixed and permanent as you were taught to believe. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost American forces at least an estimated $5.82 billion, approximately 0.69% of the entire 2026 U.S. defense budget. The primary contributor to losses was a U.S. AN/FPS-132 early warning radar system at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, valued at $1.1 billion, struck by an Iranian missile. At least two AN/TPY-2 radar components of THAAD anti-ballistic missile systems, one in the UAE and one in Jordan, appeared to have been destroyed, each valued at approximately $500 million. Altogether, Iran damaged an estimated $2.52 billion worth of U.S. military assets. Just take those numbers and let them sit. $2.5 billion in American military assets, destroyed or severely damaged by a country whose entire defense budget is a fraction of what the United States spends in a single month of operations. To combat Iran's Shahed 136 drones, a relatively inexpensive weapon that costs around $20,000 to quickly produce, America's armed forces were bleeding costly Patriot and THAAD interceptors that take years and millions of dollars to build. Pentagon officials reportedly conceded in closed-door briefings with lawmakers that waves of Iranian-launched drones were punching through air defenses, leaving American troops and bases in the Persian Gulf region vulnerable. This is the economics of asymmetric warfare laid completely bare, and Iran has studied this equation for years, first watching it play out in Ukraine, where Russian Shaheds taught the world exactly how to drain Western interceptor stockpiles at a ratio of approximately 200 to 1 in cost terms. Every $30,000 shot that forces the United States or a partner to fire a $4 million PAC-3 missile is a massive win for Iran, because of the relative cost, and because Iran has far more cheap drones than the US, and its partners have expensive interceptors. And this is not a secret. This is not classified intelligence. This is open source analysis that defense scholars have been writing about for years in journals and conference papers and think tank reports that sat on shelves while the Pentagon kept ordering more expensive interceptors and fewer cheap countermeasures. The drone gap was known, the vulnerability was documented, and yet here we are. The Islamic Republic launched so many drones across the region at once that some slipped through defenses, including a strike that killed 6 U.S. soldiers at an operations center in Kuwait. 6 American soldiers dead in Kuwait, killed by a $20,000 drone made in Iran. That is a sentence that needs to be spoken plainly, without the fog of official language and strategic framing that usually surrounds American military casualties in the Middle East. 6 men and women who enlisted to serve their country, killed by a weapon that costs less than a used car in most American cities, while the systems designed to protect them, costing hundreds of millions of dollars each, were being methodically blinded across the theater. For some reason, the well-documented effectiveness of inexpensive drones, which had received considerable attention from U.S. military planners in recent years, with numerous conferences, workshops, and working groups focusing on the issue, didn't translate into executing low-cost layered defenses at facilities in the Gulf region. The response was now being done in real time, scrambling to get it done when it could have been done before. That line deserves to be read again. Scrambling to get it done when it could have been done before. That is an extraordinary admission from people who work with national security institutions. It is the sound of an entire defense establishment confronting the gap between its own self-image and the operational reality it was living through. Operation Epic Fury cost U.S. taxpayers $11.3 billion in munitions over the first 6 days, an estimate that excludes operating and maintenance costs of the engaged military force or the damage inflicted by Iran. The AN/TPY-2 radar facilities used by the THAAD system were struck in Saudi Arabia's Prince Sultan Air Base, Al Ruwais in the UAE, Al Dhafra Air Base near Abu Dhabi, and Jordan's Muwafaq Salti Air Base. 4 THAAD radar sites across 4 different countries, struck in the opening days of a war in which the White House had already declared total aerial dominance. There is a word for the distance between that declaration and those satellite images, and that word is mythology. U.S. military power was being drawn from other theaters of interest to feed the war. Multiple launches of the THAAD system were being moved from South Korea, where they had been stationed since 2017 to assure Seoul against threats from its nuclear-armed neighbor to the north, with interceptor missiles destined for the Middle East. This shifting of pieces has not been without consequence, with tongues wagging about increasing vulnerability on the Korean peninsula. So now you have a situation where the United States, in order to fight one war it started in the Middle East, is quietly weakening the defensive posture of an ally in East Asia. America is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and both Peter and Paul are geopolitically significant. This is what happens when you design a military for dominance instead of for sustainability. You find yourself in the position of a chess player who traded away his pawns too early and now must move his queen to cover every threat simultaneously. Iran's attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure were seen as part of its defensive doctrine of asymmetric warfare against militarily superior powers. In the first 24 hours of the conflict, Iran had fired 167 missiles and 541 drones at the United Arab Emirates alone. The barrage against Israel also decreased from nearly 100 projectiles over the first 2 days to single digits in recent days, but Iran maintained a credible threat throughout. And this is the strategic logic that Washington consistently underestimates, because it insists on measuring military effectiveness primarily through attrition. How many launches destroyed, how many missiles eliminated, how many drones shot down. But Iran was never trying to win a war of attrition against America. Iran was trying to impose costs, drain stockpiles, demonstrate reach, and survive. Those are different objectives, and by those metrics, Iran was performing remarkably well. As Muhannad Saloom, an assistant professor in critical security studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, explained, "It does not matter how many you launch as long as you maintain a credible threat. It takes one successful drone to shatter a sense of security. One successful drone to shatter a sense of security." That insight contains an entire graduate-level education in modern warfare strategy, and it is why the Shahed, a slow, relatively stupid drone that can be shot down by a helicopter, is still one of the most strategically significant weapons on Earth right now. Not because it always hits, because its potential to hit never fully goes away. Iran's strategy is premised upon sending cheap drones that the US needs to shoot down with expensive interceptors. Tehran is attempting to pursue a strategy of death by 1,000 paper cuts to bleed US and Israeli defenses. And America walked into this with eyes partly open because multiple analysts, multiple reports, multiple voices had been warning about exactly this dynamic since the beginning of the Ukraine war demonstrated it empirically. The lesson was available. The adaptation was incomplete. And now the bill is being paid in real time, in blood and in billions of dollars that will have to be explained to a public that was told this war was about stopping an imminent existential threat. What makes this moment genuinely historic, and I want you to understand the weight of that word because I use it rarely, is not just the tactical details of this war. It is what this war reveals about the structure of American power in the world at this particular moment in the 21st century. The United States has spent the post-Cold War era building a military designed for uncontested dominance, carriers and stealth fighters and exquisite interceptor systems that cost billions per unit. The entire architecture is built on the assumption that adversaries would be too overwhelmed, too outclassed, and too rational to actually contest American military supremacy directly. What Iran demonstrated in those first days of Operation Epic Fury is that an adversary does not need to match American power to impose costs on it. An adversary only needs to find the seams. The destruction of the Jordan-based AN/TPY-2 radar, combined with the damage in Qatar and reported hits on communications terminals in Bahrain, suggested a systemic Iranian effort to dismantle the sensors that form the eyes of the Gulf's defensive umbrella. Gulf air defenses had been strained and occasionally surpassed by Iranian drone and missile retaliations, sparking fears among Iran's rivals that reserves of advanced interceptors like THAAD and PAC-3 may soon be critically depleted. Depletion, that is the word that should concern every American who is paying attention, because these systems do not get replaced overnight. The THAAD interceptor takes years to manufacture. The PAC-3 missile takes years to manufacture. America shot them down at a rate that the industrial base cannot immediately replenish, and the adversary that forced America to shoot them was doing so with weapons that can be assembled in relatively simple factories in a fraction of the time. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost roughly $3.7 billion or $891 million per day, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It was estimated the U.S. fired approximately 180 SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 naval interceptors, 90 Patriot PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles, and 40 THAAD interceptors. Those are not infinite stockpiles. And while Trump met with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and claimed they had agreed to quadruple production of exquisite class weaponry, the inconvenient reality that defense experts kept noting was that such weapons take up to 2 years to complete even under accelerated schedules. You cannot bomb your way back to full inventory in a month. The industrial bottleneck is structural, not managerial. This is the deep truth behind the headline, behind the $500 million radar burning in the Jordanian desert, behind the American sailors looking for hotel rooms in Manama, behind the 6 soldiers killed in Kuwait by a drone that cost $20,000, behind the THAAD batteries being stripped from South Korea to plug holes in the Gulf. What you are watching in real time is a geopolitical system under stress, not collapse, stress. But stress of a kind that the architects of the post-Cold War order never fully planned for, because they convinced themselves that dominance, once established, was self-sustaining. It is not self-sustaining. It requires maintenance. It requires industrial capacity. It requires the discipline to understand that a $20,000 drone in the hands of a motivated adversary who has spent decades studying your doctrine is not a nuisance. It is a strategic instrument. And Iran, whatever you think of its government, whatever you think of its politics, whatever moral judgments you bring to this, proved in the opening days of Operation Epic Fury that it understood the mathematics of this conflict more clearly than the people who launched it. The question now is whether America's strategic community is willing to look at those satellite images of the blackened radar trailers in Jordan and extract the right lessons, not the lessons about how to build more interceptors faster, but the deeper lessons about what war looks like when the era of uncontested dominance is over.